The Jets trade Derrick Nnadi to the Chiefs, and it's an early look at the biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses of this Jets first-year leadership group. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, August 25th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making this show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Well, cut down day is tomorrow in the NFL, but the Jets got an early start on it over the weekend. They struck a deal involving a defensive tackle. They made a surprising decision at quarterback, and more deals could be coming. There's plenty to talk about on today's show, but we will talk about the top news from Sunday, and that is the Jets working out a trade that sends Derrick Nnadi back to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs were the team he spent his first 7 seasons with before signing with the Jets this offseason. The Jets send Nnadi and a 7th-round pick to Kansas City in exchange for a 6th-round pick. This is the third time in 1 week that the Jets are involved in a trade involving a defensive tackle and a swap of 6th-round pick for a 7th-round pick. The first two involved the tackle coming to the Jets with the 7th-round pick and the 6th-round pick going to the other team. This time, the Jets send the tackle out along with the 7th-round pick and get the 6th-round pick in return. And I think in many ways, and I don't want to draw sweeping conclusions from a deal this minor, but we're early in the Aaron Glenn, Darren, Mougey regime. They still have not played their first game. We're still a couple of weeks away from their first regular season game. So we're looking for little indications about their competency level. We're looking for little indications about whether they know what they're doing or not. And I think this Nnadi trade has some elements that maybe could raise your confidence in Glenn and Mougey, and some elements that may decrease it just a tad, because this is kind of like a win-lose situation, a win-lose situation or a lose-win situation. There's some good from this deal and some bad from this deal. The bad is the Jets essentially had to give up on one of their key free agent signings at the defensive tackle spot. The Jets did not sign Derrick Nnadi with the intention of trading him before the end of the preseason. The fact that they're trading him before the end of the preseason shows that this signing was not a good one. It was not a signing that worked out. The Jets signed Nnadi to be a huge part of their defensive tackle rotation, and it's become clear just in training camp practices that he's not delivering. And it shows that the Jets made a mistake signing him. There's really no way around that. I really did not understand why the Jets thought he could be a big part of that defensive line rotation. I never thought he was that great in Kansas City. And I think sometimes the trap you fall into is believing that just because a guy happens to land on a really good team, that there's that adds some sort of talent to his repertoire. Because I see this happen all the time, where teams sign a player from Kansas City or Philadelphia, and they say, "Well, he was part of this Super Bowl winning team." Yeah, well, he wasn't the reason they won the Super Bowl. He was a guy who happened to fall onto a team that had Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones and Andy Reid as the coach. All these other great parts. Just the fact Nnadi landed in Kansas City by chance doesn't add any particular talent to him. And defensive tackle is a really important spot. There are a lot of reasons the Jets failed last year, and we've talked about a lot of them. One of the failures of the 2024 Jets that kind of flies under the radar is how bad the defensive tackle spot was after Quinnen Williams. Javon Kinlaw, Solomon Thomas, Leki Fatu did not work out. The Jets were mauled too frequently in the middle of their defensive line, and they needed to get it better this year. And the fact that first of all, you're trading a guy who was one of your key signings at the position, that's a negative. The fact that you actually had to give up, even if it was small draft capital to bring in 2 other defensive tackles to try and fix the problem, that's another sign that things did not go well this offseason. So there are some negative takeaways from this, that Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey, their first offseason kind of struck out in their free agent signings. I think there's a positive here also, though, and it's that they recognized that there was a problem and moved to address it. And that's not something the Jets have been good at in recent years on any level. the Jets have been like the ultimate team in denial. When things look bad, they just assume if we stay the course, things will work out. That's been true for years under Robert Saleh, under Adam Gase, under Todd Bowles, whether Joe Douglas was the GM, whether Mike McCagnon was the GM, whether John Idzik was the GM. The Jets have a tendency to not address problems and then act shocked when things go poorly. And one of the things I do appreciate about this is the Jets did make mistakes. Hey, you know what? Even though I just criticized them, every front office in this league is going to make mistakes. The question is, how do you fix them? The question is, the first question is, do you address them? The second question is, do you address them effectively? We don't have the answer yet on the second question. I do think Harrison Phillips is a pretty solid player. I'd imagine he's an upgrade over what the Jets had before him. The other guy the Jets traded for, Juwan Briggs, we'll see. I mean, he's really a developmental guy. But what I do appreciate is that the Jets front office and their coaching staff did not get tied down into the idea, oh, well, we signed these guys this offseason. It looks bad if we trade them. It does look bad. Look, I just told you it looks bad. But what looks worse is sticking with something you know won't work. And we've seen that happen over and over. A good example would be the defensive tackle spot last year. I think the Jets last year got into this mindset that they had made it work with so many defensive tackles next to Quinnen Williams that they could put anybody next to Quinnen and the defense would be fine. And we saw the limits of that strategy last year. There has to be some quality next to Quinnen Williams. You know, maybe it doesn't need to be a great guy. Maybe like a Sheldon Rankins can get it done, like he did in 2022 next to Quinnen. Maybe a Quinton Jefferson, you know, kind of a journeyman veteran could get it done, like he did in 2023 next to Quinnen. But when you're putting Javon Kinlaw next to Quinnen, your defense is really going to struggle. And the Jets should have realized that far in advance. The Jets should have realized that much earlier than they did, that Kinlaw was a problem in the middle of that defensive line. And I think the fact that the Jets were able to address this position, the fact the Jets were willing to address this position, it's a positive thing because it's small. I don't want to make it out to be a legacy deal for Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey that they moved on from defensive tackles who weren't working, who weren't panning out. But it is a change. The Jets do not address problems. It's one of my biggest criticisms of the Jets over recent years. If you're an everyday or listening to this podcast Monday through Friday, you know that it's really frustrated me how the Jets just ignore problems and hope that they work themselves out. And that's not the way you succeed in the NFL. You have to fix problems in this league. And what I've seen out of the Jets over this last week is an attempt to fix problems. And they did not give up much to make the trade for Harrison Phillips. They did not trade much for Juwan Briggs. And they also recouped some of the lost draft capital in this trade for Derrick Nnadi. It's always better to trade a guy if he's going to be cut anyway. And it seemed like we were moving in the direction of the Jets cutting Nnadi. So it was to get anything in return for him, I think is a win at this point. You don't love to be in the position where you have to make these maneuverings in preseason. You'd rather the guys you signed worked out, but I think first of all, the fact that they were willing to move on from a mistake, that's a very rare thing for a New York Jets fan to be able to see. A team being proactive before something reaches a crisis point, addressing it. This is a new day for the New York Jets in that regard. And the fact they were able to get anything in return, they were smart to target Kansas City. Kansas City, Nnadi's a well-known commodity in Kansas City, so they would be a pretty logical team that would be interested in him. And, they didn't get a lot for him, but something's better than nothing. So I think when you look at what's happened to the defensive tackle position over the last week, there are some things to not love, and there are some things to be more positive on. And finally, we're about to have real games with Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey, so we'll have some more robust data to actually be able to evaluate them. But, an interesting series of moves over the last week where the Jets have made big changes to their defensive tackle room on the fly. Another position where the Jets have made a big change, that's the quarterback position. Now, nothing's happening with Justin Fields. Nothing's happening with Tyrod Taylor. But the Jets did make a move that surprised me a bit when it comes to their number 3 quarterback, and I'm not sure I agree with this move. I'll explain why I'm a bit of a skeptic as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. So take a flyer on the MVP race, crown your champion in August, or parlay your division winner dark horses. FanDuel is the place to get in on the action, not just for football. We got baseball. Neither New York team's playing very well right now, unfortunately. And of course, the Jets are coming in just a couple of weeks. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets need to cut their roster down to 53 players by 4 p.m. tomorrow Eastern time. But they got a bit of a head start over the weekend. They cut a number of players in addition to trading Derrick Nnadi to Kansas City. And most of the players were not really much of a surprise. I mean, if a guy's getting cut on Saturday or Sunday ahead of cut down day, odds are they didn't really have that great of a chance to make the roster. You save your toughest decisions for cut down day. And you also save the best players who you think are going to get cut, because you never know. Some team may swoop in at the last minute and offer you a trade for a player you're going to cut. So most players getting cut over the weekend really are kind of inconsequential players. These are guys who were really kind of not even contenders for roster spots and probably not even contenders for practice squad spots. There was one surprise to me, and that was Adrien Martinez, who was the number 3 quarterback. Now, if you watch Friday night's preseason finale, Martinez did not look great in that game against the Philadelphia Eagles, and that was the backup ball. That was a game where there was not a lot of talent on the field, or at least not a lot of NFL talent on the field, and he still struggles. And I think we know that at best, Martinez is probably a number 3 quarterback, but I was still a bit surprised the Jets cut him, because as shaky as Martinez looked, Brady Cook looked worse. I mean, Brady Cook has looked this preseason. I mean, the second game intrigued me a little bit, but if you take with the Green Bay game and the Philadelphia game and add that to the Giants game and you get the full picture, I just don't see a guy who really has NFL tools worth developing, even as a practice squad player. So my guess is that Cook's going to get cut. I think it would be a mistake to keep him as the number 3 quarterback over Martinez, because Martinez is a very flawed quarterback. I'm not suggesting Adrien Martinez is good. I'm not suggesting the Jets would have a lot of success if he had to start a number of games this year. But I think if you're talking about who would be the better number 3 quarterback, we should think about expectations for your number 3 quarterback. And my expectations for a third string quarterback are somebody who can run like a shell of your offense, somebody who can execute a handful of plays and maybe keep your offense afloat for a couple of quarters, maybe a game. Based on what I saw in preseason over the full 3 games, I feel like Adrien Martinez might be able to do it. And part of it's due to his running ability. You can build in a bunch of manufactured design runs with the quarterback. But also I thought Martinez looked more comfortable in the pocket than Cook and had much more zip on his passes. And I felt like Martinez actually improved quite a bit from a year ago, because a year ago, I'm not sure Martinez was even third string quarterback caliber. And this year, I felt like he could be a number 3 quarterback. I think, this is my guess, is where we're probably heading is the Jets would sign Martinez to the practice squad to be their number 3 guy. And he just wouldn't be on the active roster. But if anything happened, he'd be the number 3 quarterback. And I'm guessing Cook's going to be cut and the Jets will just let him go, because I just don't think there's a ton of upside there with Brady Cook. But I actually think that this is a small mistake. And I don't want to make this out to be a huge thing, because odds are it will never impact the Jets. But there's a roster building move that teams don't use in the NFL that makes no sense to me. I think every team should carry 3 quarterbacks on its roster, Now, I may not have said that 5 years ago, but over the last couple of years, there's been a rule change where teams are now allowed to activate an extra player on game day as long as he's a quarterback. And he's essentially the emergency quarterback. The only way this guy can actually play in the game is if both your starting quarterback and your backup get injured and cannot continue. But if that happens, then you have somebody in there who, again, can run a shell of the offense, who can run a handful of plays. And while a guy like Adrien Martinez is not going to be very good, he's not going to be very effective, I still think that there's an enormous difference between having a real quarterback able to run those plays and putting a position player like maybe a Garrett Wilson in a quarterback where your offense just isn't going to be able to do anything. I mean, if you want an example of that, you can go back to the COVID year. There was a year where every single Denver quarterback tested positive for COVID. The NFL incredibly made Denver play that game, and it was a joke. I mean, the Broncos actually tried to sign one of their coaches as a quarterback for that game. It was just utterly ridiculous. I'm not saying Adrien Martinez is going to go in there and look like a Tom Brady at quarterback, but I do think a guy who's a real quarterback can execute an offense at a higher level than somebody who's not. And this is not just a Jets thing. Like, there are teams across the league that are not keeping 3 quarterbacks on their roster, and it really makes no sense to me. The reason this rule went into effect, this emergency quarterback rule that you're allowed to activate one extra player who's a quarterback, is because of what happened to the San Francisco 49ers in the 2022 NFC Championship game. During that game, you may remember Brock Purdy got hurt, and then Josh Johnson got hurt, and they only had 2 quarterbacks who were active. So essentially, they had to play an injured quarterback. So the reason the rule exists is that you don't want to get into a situation where you have 2 quarterbacks go down and then have nobody who can run the offense. So I think that's something the Jets should take advantage of. And I think that of the quarterbacks, Martinez is the better one. I've heard some people say the Jets should go out and find a better number 3 quarterback. There are no good number 3 quarterbacks in the league. Anybody who gets released by a team in this league on cut down day, odds are they're not a very good quarterback. Teams don't cut good quarterbacks, and there's not enough quality in the league for teams to have like a quality 3rd string quarterback. So if you're expecting like some team to cut his number 3 quarterback and for them to be like a huge upgrade on Adrien Martinez, well, you're probably in for some disappointment. I mean, I think as far as number 3 quarterbacks go, Martinez is probably like as good as you're going to get. If your team is ever down to its number 3 quarterback, you're probably in a lot of trouble. But I still would say you're better off with a number 3 quarterback than somebody who just doesn't know how to play quarterback. Because with a real quarterback in there, you can at least run part of your offense. You can at least have somebody who knows how to throw the ball. Even if they're not making great reads, even if they're not making like super complex reads and progression reads and getting to their 3rd receiver in the progression, they at least have a better sense of how to play the quarterback position than somebody who doesn't play quarterback. So I would rather see Martinez be on the active roster. I know some people will disagree with that because look, Martinez is not that good, and odds are very much against this ever impacting the Jets. Odds are against any team needing 3 quarterbacks in one game. You have to be really unlucky to have your starting quarterback and your backup quarterback both get injured in the same game, but you want to have that insurance. It's essentially the NFL, through its rule changes, has given teams a free insurance policy. And for whatever reason, teams don't take it. Jets have been one of those teams that hasn't taken it. It really hasn't come back to hurt the Jets at all. It really hasn't come back to hurt any of the teams that haven't utilized it, but it's there. I don't see why you wouldn't use it. And it seems like the Jets may not use it again this year. As Adrien Martinez maybe heads to the practice squad as the number 3 quarterback. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about some other players who could be cut, but the Jets may try and get something for them in return. It's always better to make a trade rather than cut a player. At least you get some sort of compensation for them. And there are a couple of Jets players getting some trade buzz as we approach cutdown day. We'll talk about who they are as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, and you can feel the buzz. Fantasy football season is here. Everyone's researching, drafting, and building their championship squads. If you have not joined the league yet, now's the time, and it's all happening on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. Yahoo Fantasy is loaded with fun ways to compete and brand new features that make the game even better. With season kickoff on September 4th, now's the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which offers so many fun ways to compete. Want more ways to play? Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. Want to play instantly with friends? Try the new Draft with Friends mode. Prefer the classics? Get your crew together and go head-to-head in a private league. No crew? No problem. Join a public league, the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We approach cutdown day, 4 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. The Jets will need to trim their roster down to 53 players. They've already gotten on the road to 53. Over the weekend, they traded Derrick Nnadi to the Kansas City Chiefs in a late round pick swap. There are a couple more players who could be traded by the Jets. It just feels like the NFL this year has a lot of trade activity where teams are looking at players who may get cut by other teams and making a deal for them rather than waiting for them to hit the open market. The Jets have been involved in a number of trades, already 3 trades, 2 of which brought players to New York, 1 of which sent a player out. And there's trade buzz about a couple other Jets who may not make the team, but may end up netting the Jets some draft capital in return. One of them is recent 4th-round pick Carter Warren, who has been a backup through most of his career. He's gotten a couple starts. It really hasn't done much with them. And I have to be honest with you, I'm really kind of perplexed as to why Carter Warren would have trade value. Now, let's be serious here. Carter Warren's not going to bring back a big trade package. In fact, I would guess we're probably looking at another late round pick swap, if not just like a conditional draft pick. The Jets may get something like the Jets get a 7th round pick if Warren starts X number of games and get nothing if he doesn't. We're talking about a very minimal gain in draft capital the Jets would receive in any Carter Warren trade. But it still is surprising that Carter Warren is generating trade buzz. Now, maybe the Jets just putting this out there, trying to hope that they trick some team into taking Carter Warren off their hands. But as a player with less than 4 years of experience, if Carter Warren's cut by the Jets, the other 31 teams all have a chance to claim him. And if you claim Carter Warren, you just get him. You get him in his contract. So there is a risk if more than one team claims him. Obviously, only one team can end up getting Warren. He'd end up going to the team that had the higher draft pick in the 1st round in this spring's NFL draft. So there is some risk. And that's, that at the end of the day, that's the reason you see trades right now. Lots of players are about to be cut, but teams know that if they are cut, it's not a 100% guarantee they land those players. So they give up, a draft pick, or they give up a conditional pick, or they make some sort of pick swap in order to gain certainty that they get the player. I mean, that's the reason the Jets made the 2 trades that they made last week. That's the reason Kansas City made the trade to get Nnadi back. It's just that there's just certainty involved in that. Again, I'm not entirely sure what teams would see in Carter Warren. He's not a guy who's looked terribly impressive during his Jets career. I will say at the end of his rookie season, he did play 1 good game against the Washington Commanders. That was a team that pretty much had no pass rushers, though. It was one of the most inept defensive ends groups in the league that year. So I don't know how much you can really buy into Carter Warren playing effectively against them. But to me, if the Jets can get anything in return for Carter Warren, even if it's a late round pick swap, that's probably a win, because this is a guy who I would expect to be cut and may end up on a practice squad somewhere, maybe even the Jets practice squad. So if the Jets can improve their draft positioning, I'm all for it. The other guy I have my eye on is a player who almost certainly is not going to be a Jet 48 hours from now, and that's Malachi Corley. We've talked a lot about Corley on this podcast, talked a lot about how Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas were overconfident in their ability to, first of all, scout this player, and second of all, develop this player. And you could just tell that Corley is not a favorite of this new regime. And even though he was picked at the top of the 3rd round last year, Jets traded up to the 1st pick in the 3rd round to take him. That was an old regime. Douglas and Saleh loved Corley. Glenn and Mougey do not love Corley. I personally am not a big Corley fan as a wide receiver. I think he's a guy who really is still very rudimentary in some of the fundamentals of the position, like running routes. And he's a guy who essentially at this point you need to manufacture touches for in space, but he's not that fast and he's not that elusive for a guy who's getting manufactured touches in space. I mean, I prefer the manufactured touches in space that go to Corley to be reassigned to Adrien Smith, because I think Adrien Smith's going to be more dangerous with the ball in his hand in those situations. So there's really no role for Corley, but I think that the Jets actually might be able to get something like a late round pick, a conditional pick, maybe some sort of pick swap, just because there has to be like some team out there that had Corley highly rated last year heading into the NFL draft. Maybe not as highly rated as Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas. We know that the Jets were trying to trade. Jets started trying to trade up relatively early in the second round. The Jets, it was in the low 40s when the Jets originally started working the phones to try and trade up for Corley. Corley lasted all the way till pick 65 when the Jets finally were able to execute a trade up and land him. So I think the Jets probably had Corley with the highest grade in the league. I don't think there was any team that was as high on Corley as the Jets were with Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas. But there's probably like some team out there that liked him as a prospect, and some team out there that realized that he was going to be a pretty big project. There was really no question that this was not a finished product when he entered the league. And I think the Jets really kind of messed up last year by pumping Corley up during training camp, during the offseason program, and talking about him as though he was going to be the next Deebo Samuel, as though he was going to make an immediate impact, because it was always very unlikely he was going to make an immediate impact. It was not clear where his touches were going to come from. It was clearly he was not that high on the depth chart at the receiver position. And he was a rookie still learning routes with a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers who is as demanding of his receivers as any quarterback in NFL history. It was not a match made in heaven last year. If you wanted to, I think Corley would have had a tough time contributing with any team last year, but I don't think you could have picked a worse match than the New York Jets for him, in part because of how demanding, how much precision Rodgers demands his receivers to run routes with. And Corley was still just kind of learning the basics. But some team, I would imagine some team out there would be willing to give up a late round pick for him. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe teams just saw year one and decided he's not worth it. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets were able to at least recoup something. If it's not great, because this guy was an early third round pick last year. Jets compounded the error by trading up for him. It's one thing to use one pick on a player. Jets used multiple picks on Corley because they traded up for him. So can they get something in return for him? I think we know Corley's probably going to be cut anyway. So it's really just about cutting your losses at this point. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets. It's cut down day.